Thanks for staying with us on the conversation. Earlier on, we dealt with situations in Nigeria. Let's now turn our attention to Tunisia, where the Tunisian General Labour Union, UGTT, staged a large protest against President Kais Saied's crackdown on opposition figures. Saied's opponents have accused him of dismantling democracy, which was won in the 2011 revolution. The UGTT had initially been slow to criticize Saied's actions, but has since openly challenged him. The president has defended his actions, stating that they were necessary to save Tunisia from chaos. Saied's crackdown is the largest since he took power in 2021, and his actions have included detaining a senior UN official and arresting over a dozen prominent opposition figures.
Additionally, authorities have barred foreign labour union leaders from entering Tunisia to show solidarity with the UGTT. President Saied had stated that he would not accept foreigners joining protests. In other developments, a group of around 300 West African migrants in Tunisia are set to leave on repatriation flights due to recent violence following President Saied's controversial speech last month. As of 2021, an estimated 21,000 sub-Saharan African migrants were residing in Tunisia. President Kais Saied has called for urgent measures to address the entry of irregular immigrants from sub-Saharan countries who bring violence, crimes and unacceptable practices. Now, joining us on the conversation today to shed more light on this developments in Tunisia, we have Amine, a Snoussi, political analyst and author. He joins from the Tunisian capital, Tunis. We also have Fadil Alizira, journalist and researcher. He joins us live from Washington, D.C. in the United States. And also Elizia Volkmann, a journalist. She joins us from Tunis in Tunisia. A warm welcome to you all, and thanks for joining us on the conversation. Now, I'd like to start with Elizia. In light of the recent protests and crackdowns, what specific policies or actions of Tunisia's President Kais Saied is the Tunisian General Labour Union, the UGTT, protesting against, and what impact have these policies had on Tunisian society and democracy?
I think the main thing that the UGTT were protesting is about the falling in the standards of living that Kais Saied has completely failed to address. People are getting frustrated about this constant spiralling downwards of the economy, and that they're really suffering in terms of just being able to put food on the table. And life is getting very hard. It also means, as a labour union, they're representing the workforce, and there's no expansion of industry or sort of significant growth. So they're really sort of decrying his inaction. And in parallel, sort of people are getting annoyed that it seems that all that Kais Saied does is point the finger and call somebody an enemy and then round them up and arrest them, rather than actually doing something useful and getting the economy back on its feet and people back into work and food on the table and money in people's pockets.
A whole lot of development from the UGTT. But I do wonder, just to have a background information for Fadil, and I don't know if you can help us with that. Now, looking at the current political situation in Tunisia, President Kais Saied seems to have usurped a lot of powers. Now, how does it be that President Kais Saied has come to hold such a large amount of power and control over the government and society? Just give us a background, a view of all of this.
Sure. Yeah, the background is really that in July of 2021, President Kais Saied invoked an article of the Constitution that's been very controversial at the time. Even at the time, he said that he had the power to basically dismiss Parliament and to give himself full executive powers. And since then, he's consolidated power. He had another decree the following September where he increased presidential powers. And since then, he's been ruling by decree. Of course, this has been widely condemned by his opponents, who continue to do marches and demonstrations against this. They've said what he's done is a coup, that it's against democracy. But he has been ruling by decree since then. He's appointed a new government, but it really does seem that the new government is taking quite a lot of direction from the presidency. At the same time, we've also seen the security forces empowered under President Kais Saied. So we've seen that, in fact, police and military are taking decisions that seem very much directed from the executive directly. And so we've seen them taking greater power. So this is sort of the context in which the recent events need to be understood, that there really isn't a lot of checks and balances in the system between the new parliament and the president, that really the president has quite a lot of control over the situation.
Thank you, Fadil. I'd like to bring in Amine Snoussi in Tunis. Now, Amine, the UGTT is Tunisia's largest labour union. How has the UGTT's role evolved throughout Tunisia's history, and what role do they currently play in the country's political landscape and democratic institutions? And how big was the outcome of the attendance of this weekend's protest?
Well, first, the UGTT was essential during the after-revolution era, where it helped stabilize the country and helped find compromise between all political parties from across the spectrum. The UGTT was always an opposition force, protecting the public sector in Tunisia, protecting the workers. However, since Saied coup in July 2021, they were more silent. They didn't oppose the president publicly. They were really in this wait-and-see position that I think they are now regretting, because when you see the fallout between Saied and the UGTT is also linked to the fact that Tunisia has been banning foreign unionists from coming to Tunisia to participate in UGTT meetings and protests. The protest of last weekend is a first for UGTT, because they said clearly that there is a need to liberate all political prisoners in Tunisia. There is a need to return to a more democratic power. So it seems like UGTT is now being vocal as a part of the opposition, and the attendance was estimated, I think, in between 3,000 to 4,000 people, which isn't a lot, but of course it shows how much it is symbolic that the UGTT finally joins the opposition and finally gives a clear message that Saied needs to liberate all political prisoners.
Okay, Alizia, now talking about the protest, it was a clear message, just like Amine mentioned, a sign for President Kais to release the political prisoners. But I wonder the status right now of the political prisoners. And do you think that this protest would change President Kais Saied's mind? Would it make any impact on the political climate at the moment?
I'm not sure that it would change Kais Saied's mind at all. What we've seen is that he progressively, has been incarcerating more and more people that he said in his speech on December 28th are the enemies of Tunisia. I think he's playing both a sort of very aggressive and defensive game simultaneously, because a lot of the opposition are pointing to the fact that he's not very good at governing, and that's that's something very frightening for somebody who wants absolute power. Unfortunately, he's not using absolute power for anything particularly useful. What we're deeply concerned about is actually the state of health and the well-being of the political prisoners, because a lot of them are sort of detained in provisory detention, so they could be there for a long time. They haven't been formally charged. Many of them are held under the counter-terrorism laws for allegations of both terrorism and also treason. And what's very worrying about that is in Tunisia, these are capital crimes, which means they carry the death penalty. Not that the death penalty has been enacted since 1991, but what concerns me is that in the past, Saied has said that he's very pro-death penalty. And my concern is that he will continue to spiral into committing more and more of these sort of very oppressive acts, and people should be aware that things could go to a much more sinister end. How quickly that would happen, and maybe I'm doom mongering, but Saied has a pattern of doing the terrible thing and then rolling back, and then doing something more aggressive and then rolling back. And what we've seen is, a successive wave of 2 weekends where he arrested quite a number of opposition politicians and people that he just felt threatened by. And a lot of them are just sitting quietly and rotting in jail without any due process through the courts of law.
Thank you, Elizia. Now, let's move away from the UGTT protest to another development in Tunisia. Fadil, President Kais Saied recently called for measures against what he called hordes of sub-Saharan migrants. He urged nation security forces to halt illegal immigration and has described the migrant influx as a conspiracy to change the North African country's democratic make. He says this statement...
a lot of people have said that.
A lot of people have called this statement racist. But yesterday, he doubled down. I mean, he said it wasn't racist. What do you make of this?
I think the president's statement is very clear. I mean, he's using very clearly some of the racist rhetoric that we've seen becoming more popular in Europe these days. This is a statement where he's talking about demographic change, about the racial composition and the ethnic composition and the country. This is a sort of a conspiracy idea that we've seen promoted by really racist rhetoric that has become more and more popular among some of the far right in Europe. We saw Eric Zemmour, the very far right-wing French politician. He sent a tweet approving of Kais Saied's language, saying that this is sort of the rhetoric that he was also trying to promote. So there's a very clear parallel going on. And I think it's also important to put this in the context of the fact that we've seen quite a lot of diplomatic activity from Italy in the last few months. In January, we saw the new far-right Italian leader, Giorgia Meloni, making a visit to North Africa. She visited Algeria and Libya, while at the same time, her foreign minister went to visit Tunisia and met with Kais Saied. Italy has put at the forefront of its relationship with Tunisia the issue of migration and controlling migration. And in fact, there's been quite a lot of EU funding to try and see Tunisia basically policing the migration issue from within Tunisia. So this is certainly something that Europe wants to see in terms of migrants not making it to the shores of Europe. And it seems that Kais Saied seems to be taking something from a page from their chapter. I mean, from their book in terms of his rhetoric. We've also seen him take on the rhetoric of a particularly racist party that calls itself the Tunisian Nationalist Party, that apparently has been around since 2011, but they have been putting forward this conspiracy as well about this threat of demographic change, saying that this has been funded by foreign funders to try and change the demographic of Tunisia. And in our reporting for Mishkel, I mean, we've talked to people who are from other countries in Africa, people who are black-skinned, not just from other African countries, but even black Tunisians who felt that after this speech, the violence against them has really spiked. So we've seen people who've been attacked in the streets. We've seen forced evictions. So the statement of the president has had really clear effect on the livelihoods of people living in Tunisia.
Okay, Alizira, I want your take on this particular issue, still on the demographic makeup statement that President Kais Saied said. Now, he said it wasn't racist. Now, Fadil also mentioned the fact that this has prompted a lot of people. I mean, we've also seen situations in Guinea and Mali, repatriation of the citizens. You are there in Tunis. I mean, what is the safety of black migrants? What is the support that they have in Tunisia? And as this incident really prompted this violence that we're seeing that they were reporting, how big is it in Tunisia that has prompted West African migrants to leave Tunisia?
Oh, it's been massive. I mean, but this is also, this has not come out of the blue. Last year, I reported on another roundup. There was a mass roundup, the same amount of people, 300 sub-Saharan people arrested by police arbitrarily. And the racist rhetoric in social media online in Tunisia has been growing. And when I interviewed the president of the African Association for Students last year, he was showing me videos of students who were stabbed that he was accompanying to the accident emergency unit to be treated. So this has been growing. But what the big difference is is that Kais Saied has come out with this incredibly, racist statement. It is an archetypal. I mean, I'd go beyond saying racist. It's the archetypal fascist kind of, diktat. And he's, the fact that the presidency said that they're surprised that people are calling it racist. There's no apology. There's no acknowledgement of the suffering. I mean, the numbers are massive. The Union of Ivorian People in Tunisia said that they had reports of people inside prison that was talking about at least 800 people. Civil society are documenting it, saying they know they can say with confidence that there have been hundreds of racist attacks, and also forced evictions, violent evictions, and people being promptly sacked from their jobs, and thrown into absolute chaos. And the distress in the diaspora community it's hard to even relate it in words. People are not going to church, they're not going to university. There are posters saying, blacks aren't allowed on public transport. They're not allowed on collective transport, collective taxis. They're not allowed in taxis. It's the level of the now public racist dialogue is. It almost reminds me of a situation of apartheid. And unfortunately, that it's not so long ago that in the south of Tunisia that there were school buses for black children, or black Tunisian children and for white Tunisian children. So Saied has basically plugged into a vein of a certain sector of Tunisia that holds very deeply entrenched racist opinions. But I'd also like to counter that the effort of Tunisian civil society and citizens to support the black diaspora communities here has been incredible, and the outreach and the fundraising has been so dynamic that side should also be looked at. And they are angry. These Tunisians are absolutely livid that the president is pulling people into this mess, this real mire, and this very, very dark way of thinking. And there's a genuine, I would say, there's a real trauma within the diaspora community, but I think also people who are actively anti-racist, people who campaign for the anti-racism law are deeply hurt. And there's been a lot of trolling of Sadia Musba, who is the head of Monepti, who pushed for the anti-racism law in 2018. And for those of us with friends in the diaspora, it's been, I think, one of the most emotionally.
Thank you, Elizia. Now, Amine, quite a number of analysts have said President Saied is just doing this to deflect attention away from his troubles at home, the social, political and economic troubles. Now, during his now infamous speech, President Kais Saied called migration a conspiracy to change Tunisia's demographics by making it more African and less Arab. What impact have sub-Saharan migrants had on Tunisia's economy, culture and social fabric? And is the immigrant population in Tunisia so much that it's becoming a threat to Tunisia's demography?
So that's one of the worst parts of this take by Kais Saied. Whatever the number is, it's blatant racism, to be clear. But the number is ridiculous. There is 0.5 of the population in Tunisia who are illegal or legal migrants. The whole immigration in Tunisia represents only 0.5 of the population. And people are believing there are millions of immigrants in Tunisia. People are believing this populistic take by the nationalist party that Fadil talked about. But also because Saied encouraged them to believe that, because Saied has been a conspiracy theorist for the last 2 years. He's been talking about conspiracies in every economical crisis. He's been always blaming someone, and now he found a new scapegoat. but by finding this new scapegoat, he put in danger all black people in Tunisia, and that's what's worrying. To what limit can he go in order to blame other people and not take responsibility?
Okay, I'll have one last question, please, for Fadil. While we're looking at all these issues, I mean, there's one side, the UGTT Labour Union protests, we're still having this racist comment by the President Kais Saied. Earlier on, Elizia mentioned the fact that civil society organizations have played a huge role in helping these migrants. How do we put all of this together? I mean, what exactly is the aim of Kais Saied? Do we actually see him deflecting from the real reason? And what should international organizations do at this point to help these migrants? Because Amine is saying they're just 0.5% in Tunisia.
We have to consider all hypotheses. It could be that this is to deflect from other political problems and economic problems. It could be, as I think we also need to look at, perhaps an attempt to adopt some of the European far-right policies, particularly as Tunisia is quite desperate for a new IMF loan. We saw actually the day after the president made his February 21st statement, which is a clearly racist statement. We saw the Italian foreign minister saying that he was going to speak to the head of the IMF about the social problems in Tunisia and the need for a new loan to Tunisia. So there's many hypotheses about why Kais Saied is doing this as he's doing. I think we have to consider all of them as potentially valid or maybe operating at the same time.
I'd like to use this opportunity to say thank you to our esteemed guests, Ms. Snoussi, Fadil, Alizira, and Elizia Volkmann. It's been an absolute pleasure having you join us. Thanks for your insights and your time.
Thank you.